started. So welcome to the value of the director's cut.
Woo!
I'm Alix Catherine. I'll be the moderator for today. You can find me as the host of the welcome party. And before we do introductions, we're going to set the ground rules. And I'm going to pass it over to Derick to do that since this is actually his podcast.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Derick. I guess, no introductions yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ground rules for this are, well, we're calling it a director's cut. That's kind of a catch-all for any alternative edition for a film, because a lot of times things will be called director's cuts and they won't necessarily have the director's involvement. Sometimes there's really good cuts of movies that get made with without the director's involvement because they either don't want to be involved or they've passed away. Sometimes even fans will make cuts of movies that are really interesting and sometimes even superior to the studio mandated version. So they're anything other than the kind of theatrically released version.
Perfect. So that being said, I'm going to have each person on the panel introduce themselves and their favorite director's cut, which again, director's cut is a catch-all for anything. Don't panic. I'm going to make Derick go first since it's his show, so we get it going, and then I'll start with Andrew and work way that way.
All right, yeah, so thank you. I am Derick McDuff. I am the host of the Underrated Movie Podcast that is hosting this panel. I was hoping to go last for my director's cut.
You knew the questions ahead of time.
I do. There's just too many options, but I will say, I'll go with the director's cut I think is most improved, and that would be Queendom Come. Woo! I knew you were going to
All right, Andrew.
I'm Andrew Linde. I host Nothing New, a Remake Podcast. And favorite director's cut? I mean, has to be Blade Runner: The Final Cut.
Woo!
Yeah.
Stole my answer.
You didn't think that's
It is the
okay.
correct answer.
My name is Tricia Aurand. I'm a screenwriter, author, and podcast host on Beyond Screenplay. And also, Blade Runner: The Final Cut is the one.
My name is Jefferson Carter. I'm a writer-director that wrote Queendom Come, a television series that's out on Tubi. And my favorite, you stole mine.
That's why I didn't want to go first. I'll go with like the Thief and the Cobbler or something.
So I'm gonna go a little ways from director's cut and say like special edition is gonna be Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring.
My name is Alix Marcus. I'm the podcast director for thepopbreak.com and host of Bill versus the MCU and It's Complicated, a Tom Holland podcast. And my favorite one is one that I actually saw very recently, which is The Cotton Club, Francis Ford Coppola's director's podcast.
Now, since this is a podcast panel, we are going to run this a little more like a podcast, which means I'm going to ask a question, kind of toss it to y'all, let you discuss it for a while, and then once I think you need to move on or steer the direction another way, I'll guide us away from it. So that being said, I'm going to start us off with, I think what's the most obvious question here, is what do we kind of think the reason behind why director's cuts are released?
Okay, well, I guess I'll start us off then, because I think a lot of times, for whatever reasons, it might be because studios want to have a movie come out that is a certain length, so that they can get more showings in the day. Maybe there's some creative, struggles or something like that. And I think of a movie that actually did get where the director did mostly win and get his version released in theaters, but it was a very big struggle, which was Brazil. Brazil famously, it came out in Europe with his, I think it was 1 hour 45 or 2 hour 45 minute cut, something like that. And then, did very well in Europe. People saw it, they liked it. But Terry Gilliam, who directed the film, got in a really big battle with Sid Sheinberg of Universal because he wanted to basically put out a 90-minute version of the film that was cut down, hacked to its life. It's famously called Love Conquers All, that got rid of the somber ending. It got rid of a lot of the nuance and stuff like that. And eventually, through a lot of stuff like the LA Film Critics awarding it the best film, still shortened but much closer to Gilliam's version came out in theaters. That's the exception usually. Usually, the reason you see people like Ridley Scott, or we also talk about Francis Ford Coppola, these people are putting out these director's cuts on DVD, which has unfortunately become rare and rare unless you get a Criterion one or something. because they have their kind of like quote unquote whole version of the film that can't be released because somebody comes to Ridley Scott and is like, hey, there's all this stuff about the kid in this Kingdom of Heaven movie. It's not really working. It's too long. And so for that movie specifically, Scott was like, hey, I'm going to actually shoot all of this stuff that would normally get cut out of the movie, but because DVDs are a thing now, I can put out my version of the movie when it comes out. Even if I have to remove things, I still want people to see this version of the film.
Yeah, and there's been a shift over time in how we perceive directors, and I think that's a big part of the reason as well. Looking back into the early days of film, you have directors really as like just sort of studio guys who really often had no personal attachment or personal sense of style, with a few exceptions, and they weren't really known by the public. The studio was the brand, and the director kind of didn't have like a public-facing image. You have Orson Welles and guys like that. John Ford comes to mind, who struggled against the studios, but really they were just like marching orders from the studio. You go, you make it. You have no expectation of any sort of creative autonomy. And then that really shifted into the 50s, into the 60s and 70s with auteur theory that came from French New Wave, and this idea that directors were artists and they were the author of the film really became popularized. And then following that kind of, studios really pumped the brakes on that during the blockbuster era, because they really were going for these high concept, very expensive movies, and they didn't feel like they could afford to give a single director total creative control of a project at that budget. And so into the 80s and 90s, when you have all these big blockbusters coming out, then you kind of have a director, some of these new Hollywood filmmakers become more of a brand, but they don't necessarily have actual creative control. They're more forced to collaborate with studios in this give and take. And that's where we really see James Cameron, Ridley Scott, these guys really struggling against studios to try to get their vision realized. They come up during French New Wave and thought that they were the creative control of their movies, and no, it turns out you're not. Not if your movie costs $150 to $1 million. And so that, I think, has kind of continued on, where we have some of these directors now that we think of as being like, Christopher Nolan is somebody that comes to mind too. Like, we expect him to be able to make all of his creative decisions, and he famously does. But most other directors are in a position of having their hands tied, where they do have to play ball with studios, and so you end up having, as Derick was saying, a give and take, where they do make compromises to get the movie out in theaters and get maybe the budget they want.
It's funny, Carrie Gillen was kind of the perfect example of like auteur theory gone wrong. Where it's like, it was time after time his movies had to be re-edited, reshot, or just completely failed to take off. And only recently has he been able to release like his cut or his version or something. And that's like, I think, another angle to this director's cut, this love of the idea that they're tortured artists. They aren't allowed to show you their vision. It's like, oh, finally I can show you my complete and total vision, everything, I shot and I meant to put it to the film. And sometimes you're like, well, did you need to put it in the film? I don't know. It does, sometimes
did you really, Zack Snyder?
Yeah. Did you really? I don't think 4 hours was the actual idea. What? You just put every piece of footage in there? Okay, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that goes to the heart of the question, which was, why is it released, right? I think a lot of directors would love the opportunity to give their version of their film that never gets a chance to be released to the public. But why is it released is because there's this cult around certain directors, because of auteur theory and all of that, that really causes it to be marketable. And the studios realize that they could charge the fans of these directors 3, 4, 10 times with every single new re-release and special edition and things like that. And I think that also has a lot to do with why we get to see these particular people like Francis Ford Coppola and Zack Snyder, and not some other directors who probably also had a lot of compromises that they had to make, but they never get their chance to be seen.
Yeah, I think that was one of the thoughts that I had, is the idea that with being able to, freezing. No, but being able, like, the idea of fans and fandom and how much we love films and how much we enjoy films and we enjoy story, and the idea that they can pull money from us, and they will get my money with every new release of Lord of the Rings that they come out with. It's just gonna, like, they're just like, this wasn't even in the original. I'm like, I don't care. Like, but I think that's a big part of it too, is that we want as fans to experience more of the story. We want to see more of the character. We want to live more in that world. Anybody who's ever finished a book knows that, you know, you finish it and there's actually some downtime after you finish it. You're sad about it. You miss being in that space. And so I think that, you know, it is a situation where they can pull money. I don't know if it really started out that way, if it was really just a thing that they wanted to work and make the movie shorter so that they can have more showings. Definitely understand that. But yeah, I think that's a really important point, because to me as a fan, that's what I want, is more of the thing that I love. So.
And to touch on what you were saying about the auteur theory, because that's part of the reason why I was like, I want to include things that are other than director's cuts in this definition, because that is a big thing that certain people get to like make these director's cuts because they're prestigious and stuff. But there's other cuts that I want to talk about too that don't play into that kind of like auteur theory thing as much. Like I mentioned fan cuts at the beginning. I kind of jokingly mentioned The Thief and the Cobbler, which was Richard Williams' like masterpiece that he worked on for like 50 years or something like that, and it basically got taken away from him by the studio. But fans online on YouTube, like I don't know if it's still up, but you can find it somewhere. Like it made this recobbled cut of the film, and there's parts of it that are just storyboards, but it's much closer to what he was actually making than what got released by Miramax or whoever ended up putting that out. And I would say the same thing with like other films that or other versions of films that are not director's cuts, like Spider-Man 3, not the most beloved film, but there's a cut of that. It's called either Spider-Man 3.1 or Spider-Man 3, the editor's cut, that was done by I forget his name, I wish I could remember, but the original editor of Spider-Man 3, who was like, I'm going to make a cut that's closer to what I would wanted to make. So the editor is not necessarily the quote-unquote auteur of that movie, Sam Raimi is, but editors are just as important, or very important in the creation of a film, so are writers, so are all these other people. And so sometimes it's good to see, like, they don't just, unless you're like Mike Flanagan making, writing, editing, and directing the movie, and then sure, like, have your editor's cut of Doctor Sleep. But the editor's cut of Spider-Man 3 is really good, so I think you have to remember, it's not just directors, it's everybody involved.
Yeah, Derick, even touching at the Thief and the Cobbler is a good starting point, even to look at, like, cuts that are kind of like using archival footage, or like people putting together something that they were not a part of, someone that comes in way later in the process, and they're either a fan or something about it really draws them to it. For some reason the 1950s Stars Born, 1950s, whatever that came out, the Stars Born, they don't have all the footage. Like it wasn't preserved, film wasn't preserved like that. So when you watch it now, like the best cut they have has like a handful of storyboards in it, where that's all that they could do to bridge the footage that they had. But it makes it the complete story that you want to see. And even with the Super Mario Bros., the live action Super Mario Bros., which I do love, people have put out like a re-edit of it using some earlier cut that came out. And it's really good. I think these archival people can sometimes do not exactly a better job, but tell a more complete version of the story that when it went into theaters wasn't a complete version of the story.
Yeah. And even, the 1992 director's cut of Blade Runner is probably the reason it was, circulated by like art house theaters, which was just like kind of more of a assembly of Ridley Scott's vision. That was just popularized by people, fans, as you were saying, and it's probably the reason we have the final cut today, that Ridley Scott was then given the opportunity to go back and polish that and make that what he actually wanted, because he wasn't involved in the 92 cut. But yeah, it's the fans are the ones who are excited about sometimes realizing the director's vision if the director hasn't been able to.
I really want to see that Topher Grace version of like the first three Star Wars movies all put together. Like, I know it exists and like barely anybody's seen it, but I really want to see that.
All right, I'm going to start at the end over there. You guys are going to start this conversation up, but I want to know kind of the pros and cons of these director's cuts.
Yeah, I mean, so the pro is a lot of the times the director has to make these compromises for commercial reasons that takes away from the story. There's a subplot in there that they had to cut because they needed the movie to be shorter, and sometimes that really takes away the texture and the depth of the film. Like in the film that I was talking about earlier, The Cotton Club, that's exactly what happened. It was basically supposed to be a film where there was 2 leads, and it ended up being a film where Richard Gere who was the white character, main character, his story gets the full main character treatment, and the African American character gets relegated to a very minor role, even though he was, when in the restored version that Francis Ford Coppola released, he's a co-equal in the film, and it adds so much to it, including a number of great musical numbers that were taken out of the film. And so in that case, you lose a huge aspect of the complexity of The Cotton Club, which is a film that's all about sort of how the mob took over the Harlem music scene in the early 1920s. And it became sort of a very generic gangster mob story about Richard Gere, who is not doing the best job, honestly, seeming like a real tough guy. And that's the least interesting part of the movie, but that was the most marketable one. And it was so, when they had to cut a huge amount of time out of it, it was easier to just extract that whole subplot. And even though it ended up really undermining the quality from an artistic perspective. So I think getting that back really helps in the pro side. On the con side, sometimes the directors don't always have the best impulses, and it was a good idea for them to cut that subplot or to not make that scene a lot shorter than it was in the theatrical version. And then they released the new version, and you're like, oh, I see why that was taken out.
Do we need to talk to these French people for 20 minutes?
Exactly.
Speaking of Francis Ford Coppola.
Yes.
Yeah, I think for me, the pro is the con, and the con is the pro in a weird way. I'm particularly, I believe that the pro is that you get more of the story. You get to experience it. And when talking about Kingdom of Heaven, the fact that they removed the whole sun, to me, blew my mind. I was just like, oh, there was a whole actor that was just dropped on the cutting room floor. And it also made his mother more relatable. I cared for her and her plight, whereas in the original version, I couldn't stand her. Like, I was just like, why is she, what is she, what? Like,
Yeah.
You just cut your hair? Like, it's just like, you're just really, like, I didn't care, I wasn't as invested. And so I think that for me, the pro is more story. I get to really get in depth with the character or with the world. The con to me is with that, it can utterly destroy pacing to a place where I'm tired and I no longer want to engage with this material. I think that there's times where too much, I think it's Apocalypse Now, where they put like the amount of footage that they put into the, I think it's the second?
The Redux.
The Redux, yeah, because the Redux is what, 3 hours?
It's like 4.
Is it 4? Is it, God,
It's too
dear
long.
heaven. Okay, which I can appreciate in certain ways, but when you watch the original, the idea that the pacing is a part of the story. And so to care about the characters, to have those lighter moments, lighten things up, to make those moments feel uncomfortable and then feel comfortable going in and out of story. I think it's an important aspect that pacing is taken into consideration. And so when you hack pieces of a film in, it can slow it can drag, it can make you really dislike a character because you don't want to pay attention to them anymore. So I think that for me, the pro and con are similar.
Yeah, I think on that point, like a famous, more modern director's cut is the Ultimate Edition of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. And if you listen to the Snyder fans, I apologize if there's any in the audience, they'll say, well, that is the definitive version of the film, and that's the one that makes it all make sense, and so that's the one you have to watch. And they're not wrong. It does actually help make the plot make sense, but it also makes it 3 hours long. And so you're still stuck in that very kind of morose, overheated world for 3 hours. And understanding the finer details of Lex Luthor's plot doesn't make up for the fact that I'm watching this for 3 hours.
Yeah. And I will say, yeah, that's a good point. And I want to talk about another film that was a Superman film that was taken away from the director, who then he eventually got it back. And no, I'm not talking about Zack Snyder. I'm talking about Richard Donner and his Superman 2, which is actually, I think, 16 minutes shorter than the theatrical release version. But that's, a movie where he made the first one, he was starting to shoot the second one, and it gets taken away from him. And for years, people were like, I want the Donner cut. And it's like, they had to piece things back together. Like, his ending didn't really exist, but they made it. They put the Marlon Brando stuff back in. So I think the positive is now we have this version of a movie we wanted to see that never got completed that we were able to stitch back together. And so we have this alternate version that is, at least in my opinion, a very superior version of that film. The downside is, and both versions are still available. You can watch the Richard Lester cut or you can watch the Richard Donner cut. The downside, I think, is when the old cut is no longer available. And I'm unfortunately going to disparage somebody who's at Comic-Con for the first time, that would be George Lucas, and because the special editions, I just want to watch Star Wars like it came out. I don't need to have the Max Rebo song. That's all fun and good, and if you want to watch it, if that's your preferred version, great. But the fact that you can't watch the old versions of Star Wars is kind of ridiculous. And that's the real downside, is when it's no, like you're saying, this is the definitive version. This is what you have to watch, and when you take away the option of no, this is the version I want. No, this is the right version. This is the one you should be watching. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
And I remember. Oh, sorry. When the TVs first came out, it was so exciting to have deleted scenes, and just watching those. Sometimes watching those on their own, you didn't have the context. That's for me the pro of director's cut, is where they can insert the scenes that they wanted you to see, where they belong, and you get the full kind of emotional journey. But yeah, I'll agree with that about the cons. It's true. Sometimes it's just too long. The pacing's not there. But it was so exciting to see a deleted scene, something that you've never seen before in this movie that you love, and I have it on DVD. But without the context, but once it's in context, sometimes it's too long.
In an ideal world, all of the development of the movie would be done before they started shooting it. And so they would only need to shoot the number of scenes that they were in the scripts, and those would be the right number of scenes. And that would tell the entire story. It would all make sense. And it would only be 2 hours long-ish. That's my dream world. But I'm a screenwriter. But generally speaking, editors are good. And what you guys have been saying about pacing is dead on. Editors and studios, to a lesser extent, generally understand the way that audiences engage minute to minute when watching a movie. And often when they call for shorter runtimes, it isn't just in this cold, heartless, we need to get more, we need to get more screens in the day kind of a way. It is about audience engagement, because what a studio actually wants at the end of the day is to make a lot of money with a movie, and that means a long theatrical run. And that's going to be best if it actually isn't not just the sheer number of minutes, but the story being told. I'm going to block my issues. I apologize. I apologize. And that being said, one thing studios often don't care at all about is character backstory. They really don't care that much about character motivations. So anything that happens before the beginning of this movie that explains why a character is acting this way tends to hit the cutting room floor. Think about Aliens here, where they cut the scene where Ripley learns that her daughter has grown up and she's totally missed her because she's been cryosleep for too long, and it explains everything about her relationship with Newt. Everything. And we just cut that out. Okay. So studios really tend not to care about that. They also tend not to care about theme or thematic coherence. And that can be really frustrating. And often directors, especially a writer-director, who a lot of auteurs that we think of as being are writer-directors as well, they tend to understand the theme of what a movie is. That being said, the cons are, as we've all talked about, things can just get bloated, they can get long, directors get so immersed in a world that they don't want to let any of it go. The con of a director's cut is called dependency from 1980, I mean, oh boy. Or, maybe controversially, Star Wars prequels. if nobody tells the director no at any point, and somebody in the editing room also isn't there to rein it in, then you end up with just sort of a bloated, sprawling mess.
Yeah, because ultimately film is a collaborative process, right?
Exactly.
It's the director might be the author in this auteur theory world that we live in, but he or she is doing it with a wide number of collaborators, and they all play an important part of that process, like you described. And I think that the focus on the director's cut being the ultimate version of the film can sometimes obscure that. And then, like you said, it also kind of feeds into this cult of directors that then can cause their future films to be less effective once they get all of the power that they want. They make movies that are sometimes not as good because they've been taught that they can just ignore the contributions of producers and editors and screenwriters and things like that.
Do you guys think that they ever film it kind of going, well, I know they're going to cut this because they said no, but if I film it now, I can use it later, the director's cut that I'll eventually get?
Oh, Ridley Scott literally said he did that for Kingdom Come. When you watch the bonus videos on that movie, he talks about that. How he's like, I'm going to film this because I know it's going to get cut, but I can put it back in my roadshow and my DVDs and stuff.
Scott and Cameron in particular.
Yeah.
Like, they know that they're going to lose some of those battles, but they're going to shoot it anyway. If they've got the people there on set and they've got the money to shoot today, we're just going to roll it.
So I feel like Snyder's cut was sorry, cool. But I feel like it was very much, well, I can't really write a story that's going to be 3 hours, so don't worry, I'll just brag about it later in my director's cut and then to go through. That being said, I'm going to switch it back to Andrew. You said something about DVDs and kind of getting those extended versions. So I wanted to talk a little bit about director's cut, the impact they've had on the industry, but also kind of how the industry has impacted director's cut. Things like streaming services, DVDs, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Streaming has made it more difficult for a director's cut to come out, or any kind of alternate cut. Or if it does come out, then it is kind of like sent to like streaming hell, I guess you call it, where it's like, well, it exists and you can watch it, but who cares? Like, no one's going to publicize it or talk about it or give it any actual attention. Like the Friday the 13th remake has like the killer cut. That's like the only thing you can stream. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'll watch it, but it is like really longer and has like kind of a different ending. But I don't know. That's the only thing out there, so that's what it is.
I was just going to say, it is interesting that now in the streaming era, I feel like our parasocial relationship with directors has kind of split 2 ways. Where there are directors who direct for streaming and no one knows their names, and they kind of are seen as being like streaming hacks, I guess you could say. And then we have these like more artistic directors that we expect to see their movies in theaters, and we have more of like a pedestal, I guess, for them as being these artists. And so I feel like it's kind of even fractured, the idea of what a director is even more so now, where it's like, well, you've got to go see the new, and a lot of these directors aren't even like big budget directors like Snyder or Nolan. They're people like Ari Aster and Robert Eggers and some of these horror directors, and we still think of them as being artists. And then there are these other directors who are directing rom-coms on streaming, and like those are working directors who are probably making excellent films that we just kind of disappear into the streaming verse, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I think what you guys have said is very true, that streaming has really effectively, in a lot of ways, kind of killed the director's cut because it lived such a great life on DVD. That's where you would get alternate cuts or that. And those still exist, but a lot of times it's like, now it's like the exception rather than the rule. Like Criterion does a lot of really good director's cuts, but that's Criterion is more for like kind of like film fans, people who are like actively getting physical media, which is not a lot of people nowadays. Whereas when physical media was how you normally got things, every movie had a director's cut. Like it didn't matter. Like it was just like I remember there was a whole era where every comedy, like it would be like, here's Ricky Bobby, and there's like 3 different cuts of the film, and it's just like alternate takes, different jokes, things that didn't really fundamentally change the movie, but it was like, we can sell you a director's cut. And so, but that is all kind of gone now, and so now it's like, okay, we're getting these like Criterion, but a lot of Criterion movies are or Arrow, something similar like that. But a lot of those are older films that now we're like, okay, we're gonna bring back Terry Gilliam's 140-minute cut or whatever, instead of being like, okay, like the movie that just came out last year, which is not a good movie, but has a better director's cut, like Jurassic World Dominion. Like there's a preview or like a prologue that got cut out of that film that like contextualizes a lot of things. It's still kind of a mess, but it flows a lot better, but nobody's gonna see that.
And now I have to go watch Jurassic World Dominion.
I might have sold it too hard.
You know, I think it's interesting because I think about it as a form of a lack of film preservation, and something basically, Derick, that you were saying is that I've always seen, you know, film as a time capsule in a space and time. I mean, we all have those feelings about movies that we watched when we were kids, and I think that what streaming has done is effectively killed my childhood in a way where I can only get, you know, if I don't have it, which I have a lot of physical media, I have a lot of DVDs, but I think if I can't get something, the other day I was looking for, it's actually really funny, I was looking for, is it American Pie, the director's cut?
Yeah.
Like, it's like uncensored or something like that, and couldn't find it. So I think it's sad to me that what streaming has effectively done is kill the director's cut. On the flip side of that, I do think that a lot of things that come out on streaming are definitively the director's cut. It is the cut the director's.
Which is weird that Zack Snyder made a movie and then made his director's cut both on streaming. I still don't understand that. Sorry.
But I think that's the thing is that because a lot of streaming services, especially Netflix, Amazon, Apple, have a lot of money. And so they're already putting money towards whatever that director wants to see. We saw that with television shows like Severance, you know, as well. But I think that, so within that, we're getting the director's cut in a way, but we're not, it's not the same, because I do miss the idea of, cut scenes and everything that you can, the behind the scenes and all of that stuff that you used to be able to get with physical media, so.
Yeah, well, and I think that speaks to the fact that so much of this was just marketing and commercially driven in the first place, right? Because the second that the DVD sales went away, the director's cuts, for the most part, went away, unless you're marketing to a very niche audience like us, who like to watch them, right? And that's always struck me as strange, because if you think about what streaming can do as a platform, it can give you a million different versions. You can just select a thing on the tile, and then now suddenly we're seeing this for the extended edition. No problem, you can do that with audio commentary, super easy. The technology is there. And it's so much easier than having to print a bunch of DVDs and get them into people's hands, but you can't make money off of that way, right? So therefore, if you're not being able to monetize it, what's the incentive to do it? And that shows that, I think, unfortunately, that era of DVD director's cuts, and director's commentaries and all that stuff that we grew up loving, we loved it for pure reasons, but we weren't getting it for pure reasons.
My favorite example of that, where you can go on a streaming service and select an alternate version, Muppet's Christmas Carol.
Yes, yes.
Which is the best director's cut, by the way.
With the cut song, When Love Is Gone.
Important.
Very important song. If you're going to go watch Muppet's Christmas Carol this year, make sure you go select the alternate version that has that. It's way better.
And speaking of DVDs, I just wanted to, and we talked about Alien for a second, and I want to talk about the fact that there are all these alternate cuts of Alien exist because Fox in like the early 90s or whatever was putting out a Laserdisc, and they're like, we want to make the definitive versions of all these films. And I think each of them, at least each of the first three, is a good example of what director's cuts do. I think the first one is like, hey, this is a good movie, we've got some extra stuff in it. That's cool. The second one, as you mentioned, Tricia, it's a good movie that really becomes great because you have that very important stuff, that context for Ripley's journey and like her relationship with Newt that gets cut out. And then famously Alien 3, a movie that kind of gets disowned by David Fincher, and it's really a mess. Other people come in and basically take a bad movie and kind of save it. I think Alien 3 is actually I think it's called the assembly cut, is really good. So I think that's three things you can do with the director's cut. You can add some cool stuff, you can make a good movie even better, or you can even save a film sometimes.
But there is a fourth thing you can do, which is make a good movie worse.
Yes.
We talked about with like Apocalypse Now, the director's cut of that just adds like a whole sequence where you're meeting a bunch of French colonialists and you have a lavish dinner, and it makes the thematic sense of the world, but it takes all the subtext of the film and just like puts it in the mouths of people that we don't know or care about. So it slows the pace down tremendously. There's also, like, from when I was growing up, Donnie Darko. We all loved that movie, right? If you were 15 when it came out, at least. And Richard Kelly was this up and coming filmmaker. He got a lot of credit once that film was kind of discovered on DVD, and everybody said, "Oh, he's the new auteur. We need to get the director's cut." And he put out a director's cut that filled it with a bunch of pompous nonsense that made it so much worse. You're just like, no, you didn't understand what was good about the movie that you made. So it's insightful, but not for the reasons that you want it to be.
And I want to stay there for just a second. Can we go into more director's cuts that didn't work, and maybe the why behind them?
I was just about to say that.
Perfect.
Amadeus jumps to mind. That movie won a grip of Oscars and was is a fantastic film, and is, long but moves along and tells a complete story. But it has all of this wonderful mystery in it, where you don't know who is Salieri, why is he doing this, what's the jealousy. You're kind of left to wonder about his motivations, and is he self-sabotaging? What is it all? And then in the director's cut, Milos Forman just explained it all and made him this mustache twirling villain. And no one asked for this movie. The theatrical cut won so many Oscars, and it just takes all the mystery out of it. And I think that the mystery piece, that's what's not wrong with Donnie Darko. And I think that that's where directors really can shoot themselves in the foot. It's over-explaining. It's you have extra footage that's just giving us more information that we didn't need. It was more fun to wonder about it. It's more fun to wonder if Deckard is a replicant or not. It's more fun to wonder that instead of just putting a definitive period at the end of the story.
I actually really like One Day's Director's Cut.
Incorrect.
I'm gonna say E.T. I just no. Wrong.
The walkie-talkies.
Yes. I was and I was talking about this with my husband. It's interesting to me because never once did I think when they had the guns, oh, these cops are gonna shoot these kids. Because totally that wasn't the story, right? There was nothing within the tone of E.T. that suggested that these children were going to be shot. But it was also, it livened up the threat for us as people watching this, oh, this is exciting, this is scary, it's, dangerous. I think when you take away things like the guns, when you add CGI, for no reason, the puppet was fine. So I was just very disturbed by that, and I think it just doesn't help the film. It takes away something that was personal and interesting and fascinating. And I had read that Steven Spielberg had done that because he was concerned that it didn't age well, which I think is, I really dislike that argument for film in general. Film is supposed to age. Like women, we're supposed to age, okay? People are supposed to age. Things are supposed to age, and that's okay. And I think that's where we have to get to, is the idea that this is gonna age. Is it gonna age well? Is it not gonna age well? I don't know, but at least let it age and then come back to it at an older, we're all gonna view it differently at different times anyway. So E.T., no.
Yeah. And Spielberg is an interesting example because there's another Spielberg film that had an extended edition, The Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where basically that film was such a success when it was first released, that the studio allowed him to release a new version of the film shortly after that got to fix some of the things that he wasn't happy about. He felt like the production of that film kind of got away from him. He didn't get to lock in the edit that he wanted. But in order to make that arrangement, the studio made him include some of the things that happened inside of the spaceship at the end of the film, which was not originally what he had decided that he wanted to do. And so then later on, he goes back and he releases it again in the late 90s, and he takes out all the stuff that the studio made him put in, and he extends some of the other stuff, and he goes back and he fixes it. And that's one of the rare examples where somebody goes back years later and actually tinkers with it and actually does make a better version of the film. But he had to make one bad director's cut in order to make a second good director's cut.
I mean, I think the obvious one we've touched on it are the Star Wars special editions, especially that first one, Episode 4, whatever you want to call it. That scene where Han meets Jabba the Hutt, and you're like, what even is the point of this? You're like, okay, we know there's a reason you cut that out initially. We know Jabba the Hutt is from another movie. I think it's just being like, hey, this thing you recognize, Jabba the Hutt from this other movie, now it's in this movie too. And oh wow, he stepped on his tail. Isn't that a cool digital trick we did? No, it looks really bad. So like, there's a lot of stuff that in those movies that you just don't really need. It just feels like George Lucas constantly kind of tinkering with those movies when they're pretty great on their own. And he'll take stuff in and put stuff out. Like I remember as a kid, there was the scene where Luke, I was like a Mandela effect that I did to myself. I watched different versions of the movie, but there's like a scene where Luke falls down in episode 5, down the big shaft or whatever, and I was like, does he scream it or is he not screaming? Because he doesn't scream in the original cut. Then in 97 special it is if he doesn't, but in the later versions, they took the scream back out. So it's just like changing it back and forth. Yeah, so that's a special edition.
Do you think they'll ever do like special editions of 789? Because it is the legacy of Star Wars, because 1, 2, and 3 also received, various edits throughout time, and now we have 789, and people are a little unhappy with some of those.
They're like, JJ, what other ideas do you have?
Yeah, Ryan Johnson, get back over here.
So, let me ask you a question with that, because we have different directors, if I understand correctly. So would you want like, oh, I want the director who did this movie that I enjoyed, make a director's cut of those films? Or do you want the directors who release them to go back and make films that maybe they had wanted to do that were stopped by studios?
I would like to see someone else do like a version of it. Because like I touched on earlier, I think it's really interesting when fans or like other creatives get to tinker with movies. Like famously, you touched about Orson Welles, Tricia, and like a lot of his movies got away from him. Touch of Evil is one that, I think it was after his death, Walter Birch went back and did a version of that film. Or like something like I mentioned the Topher Grace Star Wars, speaking of Star Wars. Or even something like fan edits, like there's a Dune, like David Lynch's Dune fan edit that exists online that is, I think, puts in a lot of really interesting stuff. So yeah, I want to see, or like, here's a good example. It's a weird movie, it doesn't work if you haven't seen, or a weird version doesn't work if you haven't seen it, but Steven Soderbergh did a version of Raiders of the Lost Ark that's black and white and has the score of The Social Network. And if you like are a big movie fan and you like love Indiana Jones, he basically was like, yeah, this is just to see like really great cinematography, and it looks amazing. It's kind of incredible. It's just like silent action, and so stuff like that is really cool.
In my life.
Yeah, check it's like on the website. It's on the website.
Oh god.
All right, I know we're trying to get closer on time here, because we have about 7 minutes. So what I'm kind of hoping here for just the tail end of it is where you see the industry taking these cuts in the future. And I'm going to start on that end with Alex.
I think that they're going to still be used to kind of build the cult of the next auteur filmmaking generation, right? Like how we're seeing with like Ari Aster, for instance. He gets to release his Midsommar extended edition because A24 is invested in building him up as a brand. So I think that's going to be mostly how we see it used, which I'm kind of two minds about. I would like to see people get more people get opportunities to do it. Because every director has things, like we talked about earlier, that they want out of their film that they would love to take in. But I also think it's really important that we, like you were saying earlier, that we maintain the original releases when we do get them. Because right now, like if you go on to like Apple, iTunes, Amazon to rent or buy one of Francis Ford Coppola movies, you can only get the ones that he released in the last 10 years, the director's cut versions. And that's crazy. Like you should be able to get both versions so that way you can see like, oh, this is what the original film was and this is what it is now. And so I hope that there's a movement in the fan community to try to make sure that we hold on to the original version of the film while also giving people the opportunity to experiment. And if that doesn't happen, a good resource is your local library, because a lot of people don't know this. You can rent movies for free at your local library, and they have stuff from like 15 years ago just sitting there on the shelf. So if you want to watch something, you can do that and not give a tech giant any money also.
I think that unfortunately the way that it's going to be used is, I hope it goes the auteur way. I really do. And I see that for some directors. I think that it's really going to be used to continue to perpetuate a streaming service or a need for a streaming service or a desire to be or to have that streaming service. And so I think that what we're going to see is the Disney way, which is the way that they're putting out live action, is in a sense a director's cut. They're old films. You could make that argument. I think that that's what you're going to see is a lot of these streaming services putting out the director's kind of Stranger Things, like and people are going to be like, well, I have to go back and now I have to have the streaming service to watch that. I do feel that that's definitely a possibility, but I also think that if it does happen where they have all of the versions on their streaming service, I do think that that would serve them better and it would serve us as fans better by far. So.
Yeah, I do think there will be a lot of quote unquote auteur stuff, because I do think like really the only things that we've seen are the kind of things that people in this room like, which are, the movies that are put out by Criterion, Shout Factory, and Arrow, and like these kind of like, boutique DVDs that those are really where a lot of like studio mandated director's cuts I feel like I'm live. But I think, as I've touched on with the fan cuts, the democratization of like editing tools, like in the past, you had to like go and like get a thing and splice a thing. Now you can just upload a program, download a file, and make it your own. So I think there is going to be a lot of like, for example, I've always kind of been like, I would love to cut Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3 into one coherent movie that works. That would be my director's cut, So I think there's going to be two ways it's going to go, and we're going to see more people, just regular people on the internet re-editing films, but also you're going to see like the high-end, 4Ks and stuff like that, where you can only get this version of Orson Welles' movie.
I do worry though with that, what happens when it comes to like AI, because like you could totally see a rise of fan edits where it's like, what if Humphrey Bogart started the Social Network? Like, like nobody needs that. Don't do that. Don't put it in place of Andrew Garfield, please.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's really interesting the relationship that we have with directors as an idea and studios as an idea, because, as I said, studios themselves have popularized sort of the idea of the director as an artist, and that actually assists them in their brand. Like, this was the whole thing of the blockbuster era in the 80s and 90s, was saying like, oh, we have James Cameron to do this, don't you love James Cameron movies? Come and see Aliens or whatever. And that studios have been able to act as like a lightning rod for the problems that people have with the movie while holding up the director as brand and profiting off of it both ways. And I think we're just going to see that continue, and maybe even more so. So, something like we're going to shell out $70 million more to do Snyder Cut, and now we have two versions of a movie that we can profit off of, right? Math is a little bit sketchy in streaming because no one actually knows who's making any money on anything once it starts to live online. But it is this like studios pull this sort of nifty sleight of hand where they can act like the villain and say, oh, the director wasn't allowed to do this and this and this. Now don't you want to buy another ticket and go see what we then did let them do later on? And they're kind of having their cake and eating it too, where we revile the studios and their money-grabbing ways, and they cut out all of the art. And then also we pay them again because they give the director the chance to do their vision. And they're going to keep doing that as long as they possibly can.
I was really worried that the future of director's cuts, especially on streaming, was going to be, there was a few years ago, after Hateful Eight came out, Netflix had a version of Hateful Eight that was cut like a TV show. Like, it was split into episodes. And then I think even recently, Linde did it with Australia.
He sure did.
I was so baffled by this.
It was very confusing.
It's extremely, because they retitled, Australia, they specifically retitled something else I can't even remember.
Far Way Down.
Yeah, I was like, what is this? I was like,
They promoted it as like a new show. It was wild.
This is the future. I was like, this is the future of director's cut, where they're just going to say, oh, you get the full story now, but you have to watch it like a show, because people love binging shows, so it's more palatable to streaming audiences. And I thought, this isn't a movie anymore. Like, that's not where it should go, but maybe that's where it's going.
All right, guys, we are out of time here, so I'm going to have you just go down the line really fast, say your name and your social media. That way, if people do want to hear more from you, they know where to find you. They're going to have people last them. So I'll start with Alex.
Okay, so again, I'm Alix Marquez. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Alix Marquez, and Media Makings on Letterboxd.
I'm Sarah Jefferson Carter. You can find me at Sarah Jefferson Carter on Instagram, and you can find my show Queendom Come on Tubi or at Queendom Come _official.
I'm Tricia Aurand. I co-host the podcast Beyond the Screenplay, and you can Google me and find me everywhere.
I'm Andrew Linde. I host Nothing New, a Remake Podcast. You can find me on most social networks at Podcast Radio.
I'm Alix Catherine. You can find me at Alixy Galaxy, ALIXY, mostly on Instagram, and then of course the person who put this panel together.
I'm Derick McDuff, host of the Underrated Movie Podcast. You can find that podcast however you listen to podcasts or on social media by just looking up Underrated Movie Podcast.
Let's hear it for our panelists, everybody.